many of the kinds of tropes that we're hearing right at this moment in our American history was what she grew up with. And so that's why she wanted me to sue people. She thought that I could actually I could make a difference. And when she realized through the work I did in the arts, she said I was really wrong. I was wrong.
So you started on this path of being an artist, but what has led you to muralism as a form of art?
Well, I can point to a number of kind of moments. So my mom said you can go into the arts if you do something that you can earn a living at. So I said, okay, I'll do teaching at the same time. And I like that. I was in love with teaching. And I focused on high school teaching. And I think that had to do a lot with the neighborhoods I grew up in, and realizing that there was conflict in those neighborhoods, and that at high school was a moment at which you could influence young people to change their positions on each other and to begin to work together. So I was a high school teacher, and I was working for I was in the university, and I was doing my master teaching, and I went into the Van Nuys High School, junior high, and I watched a professor or teacher, a high school teacher, basically discourage a young Latino boy. He was making this amazing sort of Mayan figuration of a bird that was complicated and beautiful. And I was coming in once a week as this, young undergraduate or graduate student. And one week I came back and Julio's bird was gone. And instead he had a Hallmark card kind of image. And I said, what happened to the beautiful bird, Julio? He said, it was wrong. It was wrong. I said, why? He said, look, and on the blackboard the teacher had drawn birds that were the Hallmark. And she was teaching them a math lesson. There was this many birds on the telephone line, this many flew away, how many were there, right? And unbeknownst to her, she had just totally destroyed this boy's vision, right? So I promptly went into my professor at the California State Northridge and said there was no chance that I could have gotten into UCLA because there was no money in our family to do that. And I said, I quit. So she said, you can't quit. My professor said, you can't quit. You're a gifted teacher. I said, I quit. You're going to wreck me. Let me see if I can do this by myself. And that's when I actually started. I took a job working in East LA. And promptly, because of my Spanish surname, they threw me into working in various parks. And it was through the program that was the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act. I mean, some of you might remember, when I talk to audiences, mostly they have no memory of that period. But that was an amazing program in which I was working with 20 artists. So I was teaching in different parks. So I'd go from park to park, and they put me teaching macrame to elementary school children. I didn't know how to teach macrame to elementary school children. I was really good with at-risk and really, dicey young men primarily, right? I was good with gang members and people like that. And I saw on the wall in one of these places, this is really profound, it said, it said in giant 4-foot letters across the Little Sisters of the Poor Convalescent Home wall on Mott and 2nd Street, it said, I would rather live 1 year as a lion than 100 years as a lamb. I think that might have been Ho Chi Minh, right? I don't know whether somebody would remember where that quote came from. And I thought, that's it. That's what I want to be. I'd rather live 1 year as a lion. I'd rather do work that would have real profound changes. And that set me on this path of realizing that the walls were ways of communicating, that young people were using them already for gang affiliations, and that those affiliations could be turned into more articulate essays and sentences, and they could speak about their identity, not simply, yo soy flaco, right? I'm skinny guy, right? Or puppet from Barrio Nuevo, but could be something else that could actually be much more profound. And that's when I began working with these kids who were sitting in the parks and excused because they didn't want the teenagers in the park. So that became my focus, and that's how I started murals. And I started working in various parks, putting teams together organizing across gang members' territories, and created the first mural teams. The first team was called Las Vistas Nuevas, the new view.
You're beginning to touch on this, but before we start looking at some of your work, could you tell us what defines murals or muralism as opposed to other forms of art? I know this is a controversial question.
Yeah, I've written a lot about that. And typically everything I write says a mural is not an easel painting. Right? It's not defined by the edges of a frame. It's defined by your peripheral vision. It's made in connectedness, connected to the place that it's placed, to the people that it's painted for, and to those who are participating with you. So in other words, I'm designing for your peripheral vision. Right now, I can still see my fingers. That would be my easel, right? And how it would be in relationship to the people that live in the place that is seen is part of what a mural painting is. So perhaps in the 20th century and on into the 21st, the most advanced mural painting came from the Mexican muralists and Los Tres Grandes, which is the precedent for my work. Orozco, Rivera, Siqueiros.
Well, maybe we can start to see some of this.
Okay. So what I did today is I brought a kind of overview, and I'm happy to take questions, and I'll try to go through this pretty quickly. There's a lot of work to try to explain what I've done. And so I'm going to go quickly through imagery and show you a whole set of different works. And I thought I would start, well, perhaps the most important thing about all of this is that my grandmother Francisca, who was probably Apache, and she was a mestiza. When you see her, you'll see she was not a Tarahumara from Chihuahua, because from Chihuahua the faces of the indigenous were rounded people, rounded faces, and they lived in the Copper Canyon region. She was from a town called Jimenez, and she really looks like a fierce Apache. And she was perhaps the person most profoundly that taught me that I could do, as a young girl, anything I wanted. And I think one of the other things that's profound in terms of my own education is that I was raised by women. I had entirely a circle of women. And also I was raised in a giant gang of family members. I have at least 60 first cousins, right? And now they have children, I can't even name them all, right? But we are a large family, and we're very connected. And right now, who helps me with my work? A lot of people come forward when I'm in trouble. And, there's one side of our family that seems to be kind of mathematical, and then the other side of it is sort of artistic. So I'm always going to the math folks and saying, is it one of our cousins, an accountant, who can help us with this budget, right? So, so we have these two sides. So what I thought I'd do is I'd start a bit with land and memory, which is the basis of my grandmother's teaching, that the story is embedded in place, that there's a relationship between the place and the story that can be told about that place. And I think that's an indigenous concept. I didn't really realize that until later when I was talking with the Native American friends and taking a walk through the Southwest and watching a friend of mine tell a story who wrote Almanac for the Dead. We were walking through the landscape, and she said, when she got to the mountain, we got to this particular part of the trail, it would trigger part of the story, and we'd walk further, and then another tree or something else in the land would trigger another part of the story. And I completely understand that. That's why I'm continually lost in LA, because they keep changing the story. And they take a gas station out, or I'm just driving on campus, there's new developments. I was going, where's the Holy Guard? Somebody's building on that, and I won't recognize the street. So I'm going to start and talk about this notion of identity. And the struggle very early on in the early 70s, for me as a young Chicana, to find that identity. And I was coming through a university, and the University in the Arts was really interested in gestural painting and work that it was really abstracted work. And doing figuration was, in fact, what brought me a D in painting. So I got a D in painting. I did have my moment with those faculty at one point. I did a graduate address, a keynote for the graduate courses, and then I announced it. And you guys gave me a D in painting. So it was fun. But it was truly about the fact that figuration and the looking to the north or to the south was not within what we were teaching. We were looking at work that came from Europe. We were looking at work that came from the East, but there was no talk. I knew nothing of the Mexican muralist until I was painting on this mural, Mi Abuelita, in 1970 in Hollenbeck Park. And I was working on the site. I had no support for this. I was teaching in these little classes, macrame and painting for children and things with senior citizens, and walking through a cadre of gang members who were excluded from the productions or from the teaching within the parks. And I started to see them with their drawings and their tattoos, and I said, and I would walk past and they'd say, hey, art lady, show us your art. I said, okay, you show me yours, right? And that's what began to create this team. And this is the first piece we painted, Mi Abuelita. You can see it's pretty crude. And that's me as a pretty much a little girl, starting this painting on the outside of the band shell. This is the home where the Feria de los Niños would occur, so that children would dance in their arms. And this is a kind of rendition of my grandmother. I went from there to Hollenbeck Park, to Wabash Recreation Center, another contested gang territory. And the Department of Rec and Parks was perfectly willing to let me paint on these places because there was kind of a thing happening. And as long as I taught my classes in addition, right, I could go and do this painting. And what was happening here is that boys were ripping the doors off the front of this park over and over again. They couldn't keep the front doors on. And it was White Fence Gang at that point. And basically, you're looking at people from White Fence Gang. They're basically children. These are little guys, they're little children. And that's me with a bandana up on the scaffolding with a drawing. It was the drawing that became a piece called The Medusa Head. And very quickly I understood that the reason they tore the doors off the park, and they thought I was a miracle maker because they stopped tearing the doors off after we put the murals on. It wasn't really because of, so it was partially because of the mural, but in addition, there was a basketball court inside that they closed at night and they couldn't get in. So I simply said, can I have keys to the basketball court? I opened the court, no more doors being torn off. And I became a miracle maker, and then they gave me more paint. I was also exploring the notions of what a Chicana was, and that was based, what was I to be as a Latina? It was like the virgin, the mother, or the whore. Those are three options that we had, right? And so I started playing with these images, and this is actually me in 1970, based on the way I went to school, the way I looked. Hortensia would never let me do that, but it was my cousin Esther, right? And she was older, and I admired her, and she shaved off her eyebrows. I highly recommend that you don't do that. I did it once, it took me years to grow them back, right? And I became the Pachuca. And she is a counterpart to the Zoot Suiters. And the ratted hair, the raccoon eyes. And so I started to play with this image. And I created this work this is a piece that I did for, in silkscreen of the Pachuca. This is a triptych that was a three-sided piece with the mirror in the middle. And this actually premiered here at UCLA in the first Chicano show. It was at the White Gallery. And it was an amazing show because it was the very first time we were showing Chicanos as a separate group of people in an exhibition. Thousands of people came to the show. There were people waiting for lines to come in to see the show. And this was my contribution, which was the triptych. And I stood there for 5 hours and talked to young people who came up to this piece and had their image taken, a photograph taken in the mirror, because the third Maria was you and what you could become of yourself, what you could make of yourself. And this was, of course, me struggling with my own identity. And you can see all the tuck and roll here is my father did for me. And the tuck and roll is from the lowrider cars, and it's still a practice within the lowrider culture. The girl who's standing to the left is another girl from Pacoima. I have some amazing images of her now at 50. They're standing with gray hair in front of this piece. And this is among the Hispanic treasures in the Smithsonian. So these pieces which were ignored by the art world, ignored the white gallery and the critics that wrote terrible things about the show, and did not understand how in the same hollowed halls that had held Matisse were all these crazy Chicano artists, and that it was terrible art. And yet what we saw was this profound impact in the city of LA to see this work coming out of our community. This is a piece I did at 20. So again, I'm struggling with this whole notion of what my identity was. So there's Francisca on the right, my grandmother, and me standing behind her, back in the back, me at my first communion, and my mother below. So this is me talking about those. What was the connection between us? The vibration that connected us. This piece is now also has been collected by major museums. So, in other words, these pieces that were ignored are now among the national treasures. This is a piece that I did when I was working in the East Side with the boys and the gangs, and I lost one of the boys from Wabash, one of those little guys, was executed by another gang. And I came home after Jorge was murdered. He was 17 years old, and was just completely distraught. And I used wood stain and newsprint to produce this work, which has toured extensively. This work is called Killed by a Placa. In other words, killed by that identity. I was dealing with the fact about this sort of gang identification. This work is a piece called The Uprising de Mujeres. It's currently just been purchased by the Smithsonian. It will be premiering this year in the National Gallery of Art. It will be alongside of the Thomas Hart Benton. And I gotta say, I'm really excited because Thomas Hart Benton is kind of right-wing. Now they have to listen to me too. The opposite point of view, the opposite voice. And so I was working with this image of an indigenous woman, and I designed this in Mexico. I was at the Taller Siqueiros. I was studying there in the workshop run by the great David Alfaro Siqueiros. And there were 26 men and 1 woman, me, right? Because muralism is not an area for women, right? And I designed this piece, and it was rejected by my team. And so it didn't get painted until I came home, because the work that they were doing was about women becoming consumers. And that they did a piece that was a woman spread eagle with a funnel in her mouth with all these products being poured into it, which I told them was a rape image and that I wouldn't paint it. And so they kicked me out of the team. And I was walking on the street and I saw this woman. And she was magical in the sense that she was an indigenous woman. And she was making the sounds the sounds my grandmother used to lull me to sleep. And I realized that that was an indigenous way of calming a child. And that's the image that I painted. And on the left-hand side, I had a moment about a councilman named Councilman Wilkinson, who rejected the mural programs in the city of LA, and it was putting more and more into the incarceration of youth, and basically not dealing with the issues that we needed to deal with within our communities. So I got even with Councilman Wilkinson, and I also elevated the indigenous woman and talked about this notion of money and how money ends up being, the making of money and where that money goes is really a critical issue. It's a housing project. So this will open in the National Gallery this year, which is going to be quite exciting. The Smithsonian has done a massive restoration of it. They've been able to X-ray down to the lines, the first lines I made, and they asked me questions like, they just did an interview a couple weeks ago, and they said, why did you change her figure to be, her foot to become magical and that you could see the bones? I said, I didn't. I said, yes, you did. I said, what do you mean? And then they showed me an X-ray. I said, I guess I did. I don't, so they could actually go into the piece and see into the first lines that were made. And so it's been an amazing thing. This is of me painting it in our studios at Spark. This is from the uprising, and you'll note that the women are in the foreground. That's why it's the uprising of women. In other words, that women need to be leadership. Because obviously a lesson we have not learned. This is a image of the farm workers, and it's part of that piece. This is you can see the vegetable cases actually having a different part of the story of the Central Valley workers. This is another piece, another memoria de nuestra tierra, and these memoria pieces about land and memory in different places. And this is a piece that USC commissioned, and I work with students there to create this work on a memory of the land. And of course, the river is a central aspect of this, and it's turned into concrete. And the kiva is in the center part of this piece. This is about a 30-foot piece. It's still at USC and can be seen in their graduate lounge. One of the things that UCLA, as I came from, I was teaching at UC Irvine, and then I came to UCLA during the hunger strike, and students came and talked to me, and I spent the whole night in a tent with them and listened to them talk about why I should teach here and why I should come and be part of the faculty. And I said, okay, I understand that perhaps I could bring the teaching I'm doing on the streets into the university. And I proposed then, with a little bit of negotiating power, that I would begin a lab that would be a digital lab that would advance muralism into the 21st century, looking at new methods of producing work and be able to teach in a setting where I can have my students respond to the community. So this is what we developed. We developed the new Cesar Chavez digital mural lab. And the lab is equipped with the most modern equipment. Today, we can even draw on the screen, and we can produce work at a big scale. They can be printed out, and when we get to the Great Wall, I will show you how we're advancing historic techniques into the new advanced methods of painting. So I had about 24 students in this classroom that was created out of the old motor pool building in the Venice jail. We have a 1929 jail with about 10,000 square feet in it, which we've transformed into an art center. And the motor pool building is where we run our digital lab. So again, another memory piece. This is Francisca, my grandmother. And this is the first time I told my own family story. And we were in Denver. My mother was born right outside of Denver, Colorado. And when the commission came up, I said, oh, there's a commission in Denver. I don't know if I'm going to do that. I don't know if I'll do that. And she said, do it. And when you're doing it, please recover my grandfather's grave, my father's grave. So I then learned that our graves had been allowed to go fallow just as they did with African Americans throughout the South. And that this area outside of Denver, all the Mexican graves had been disappeared. So that therefore my grandfather's grave was missing. And my mother had gone back and found that out. And she said, please do this work and recover this moment. So it began a research project for me. This is the way it looks in the Denver International. So if you're in Jefferson Terminal and you're waiting in security, you'll be standing in front of my piece. And you will get a giant lesson about the story of the Southwest and what happened for Latinos in that region. So this is a miner from Chihuahua. He's a coal miner, and what's amazing about him is look at that scarf and his shoes, and I mean, it's just beautiful. I mean, he's clean. He comes out of the mines blackened, right? But he goes into El Paso and he has his photograph taken in about the 1920s, and I just thought it was an amazing image. I don't know who he is, but I loved it. And also the image of Cesar Chavez and Corky Gonzalez. Corky Gonzalez was if you could sort of describe him as our Malcolm X, right? And Cesar Chavez is our Martin Luther King. At least Corky was much more adamant about change now, by any means necessary, and Cesar Chavez was really trained in nonviolence, and the two were bringing, at this particular moment, the photograph that I found in somebody's garage in Colorado was the moment they were bringing the grape strike to Colorado. This is the woman in the Cheyenne Massacre. You can see her. She was part of the Sand Creek Massacre, in which 350 women and children and Native people were slaughtered by a captain in the cavalry. The only memorial to that is the town named for Chevington. Nothing that memorializes these people, which is a lot of what happens within the creation of monuments in America. And so this is the Cheyenne Massacre memorialized in this piece. And the last part is my grandfather among the workers. So in 1919 or so, when the Mexican Revolution was occurring, his ranch was raided in Chihuahua, and my grandmother and my grandfather crossed over into the United States before there was a line. Basically, people came freely back and forth. They went to Colorado and they joined my grandfather's father, and that's how they ended up in Colorado. So you can see him among the workers in the railroad. So his choices were to work in the fields, or to work in the railroad, or to work. I think it's got a little bit too light in here. Can you bring lights down? You're kind of ruining my color. So you can see also my grandparents as the two figures in the walking on the over the river, walking on water. No light control here. There you go. Whole different story. Okay, so you can see my grandfather, and you can see them walking on water. This sort of miraculous crossing. The Cheyenne woman reflected in the Arkansas River. So this is really the forgotten stories, right, of the people who crossed like birds and fish and water across the line that didn't really exist. This is the Ludlow strike, made up of immigrants who worked in mines, and they were, they lived in company housing, they ate company food. Their income was restricted by the coal mines. And at this point, they went out on a strike together. And it was the Rockefellers that actually stopped the strike and created a kind of massacre of a number of these people. People today in Colorado still wear T-shirts that say, "Remember Ludlow." Interesting. I was at Harvard at a residency, and it was sponsored by Rockefeller. And I found this material. So the question is, does it go in the mural? Do I put it in the mural when Rockefeller is sponsoring me? Yes. And what I say over and over again is, I don't make the history, I just paint about it. I just make the images about it. So in other words, if we don't like what we see, let's change it. Here's the moment they are conferring about bringing the grape strike. And they are created into mesas. My grandfather, an image of my grandfather, Theodoro, and the fulfillment of my mother's wish. We brought the archdiocese, we brought the people from the legislation, and we recovered the family graves in the small little graveyard. He went on to the BBC. It became nationally known that this area was ignored and the graves decimated. So a similar story in the 80s in Los Angeles. Central Americans began to come. This is the Central American Research and Education Center. They asked for a work that would tell the story of people coming from El Salvador, from Guatemala. And again, we began with the notion of the creation of a timeline, of collecting the people's images from their families, of creating a method of recovering stories that were lost. And we began to construct images and the story about this transfer of people. The Hermano Blanco here has killed a mother and child. This is from somebody's family album that they collected and kept. This is people being disappeared, almost 75,000 people being disappeared from El Salvador. This piece would have been hard to get on the street of LA. It would have been censored, okay? But because it was at the Central American Research and Education Center where you can go and see it, and you can get a tour from a young Mayan who will tell you the whole story. And will walk you through the imagery and say, that's my grandfather's image. They will tell you what had occurred in the central part of the city. These are all images that became part of the La Memoria Historia archive in the Central American Research and Education Center. It was estimated that 75,000 people were killed. This was a woman who did this drawing that was from the El Mesote massacre in Central America. And I thought the drawing was so wonderful that I used the drawing exactly as it was in the body of the work. I worked with the scholars and the Latino professors, and worked with the people from the community center to create the imagery. None of it was imagery that I knew anything about, so I was being totally educated in the process of making this work. The central image was decided by the people, and that was a young woman who was a mother who's standing against the paramilitary behind for the creation of this image. You'll see Oscar Romero in the background, the people migrating out of Central America, and this piece is called The Migration of the Golden People. Very powerful image, and one that is installed at Garrison. The interesting thing about this work is also a digital image. So it can be reproduced and placed in other places now. We're beginning to actually advance the form. As we worked in over 35 years in the making of murals, we discovered that murals were being censored and that some could be disappeared. And what was censored, basically, what was disappeared or not maintained was censorship in the rear. In other words, don't maintain it, you can disappear it. So part of what we've done now is we are making sure that every work that is created is also a digital image. It can be reproduced. So disappear my pieces, they'll come back. They'll come back.
Is this how muralism has begun to change over the years?
Yes.
It's not just painting on a wall, it is now being able to do it digital.
Exactly. This is another work done by my students and I and on the UCLA lab. And you know, the UCLA lab was great because we could put on food, cook a pot of frijoles, and we could work into the night. Right? We didn't have to worry about, having to have permission from the university to stay late. So we were able to put real time into making these works. And this piece was sponsored by the hotel and the restaurant workers. And this is the Miguel Contreras Learning Center. So they transformed that. We made the learning center. They asked us to do the cafeteria. My students were thrilled, that they could actually have some funding to do this. The young girl that I have my arm around is Karina. She now teaches at this school. She was 18, and she's saying, I want to come to UCLA. I want to be in your class. I want to major in the work that makes me an artist like you. I said, you're on. Get yourself in. Just be able to get into the university, make your grades stay up high, and get in. She did. She's now teaching there. She graduated from UCLA, and you'll see her in the piece. That's Kent Wong from the Labor Center, and a number of people who helped us. We worked with the high school students. My university students mentored the young people as they were developing content for the mural. You see them working here together. And the stories they told us were amazing. And these little index cards tell you the story. I try to study, but the thing is that I can't study because there's too many people in my apartment I have to go to the rooftop to be able to read. And you can, this little girl's trying to hold off people. You can see this because I live in a single room apartment, and she's talking about this experience and what that is like. So my students began of course many of them coming from similar experiences are learning to be compassionate, learning to hear the story, and then to tell that story. So here is the team, that's the site we're working in. Here's my whole team. And there's Karina in the center. And the completed work. It's called La Gente del Maíz, the people of the corn. And it's 3 figures. The center figure is Karina. She got selected by the team to be the center image. And then to the right, and she's planting the corn. And in the corn are labor leaders and people who are heroes in our community. And to the right is someone watering those seeds. And to the left is the soil, and that's Miguel Contreras as a young man who worked with Maria Elena, who was married to Maria Elena Velasco, who was one of the founders of Justice for Janitors. So you can see all the people marching down the street. Maria Elena is depicted in the center, pushing a stroller. I wanted to make her a hero. She wouldn't be a hero. She said, put me with my grandchildren in the center. And there she is. And then all the story is all these things on the rooftops of the various stories the kids told us in Pico Union. This is a Pico Union piece. You can go and see this piece at the Miguel Contreras Learning Center. So we also built the monument to Cesar Chavez. This took a number of years. This is on the San Jose campus. And this, you can see the glass eagle, which is the United Farm Workers Eagle. And these insets, the niches, are mosaics. The mosaics are made of glass, and this is an incredibly laborious process, but they're permanent. They will not die. They will not fade. You'd have to take a hammer to chip them out. And it's a central passageway on San Jose State University's campus. So I painted these pieces, and then these became mosaics. And then you can see Dolores Huerta here with Cesar Chavez. Thousands and thousands of images of little, and they cut your fingers as you're putting them down. They're just really a pain in the neck. I don't like it. I don't like mosaic. But here it is. The outcome is a fabulous piece. And Dolores is standing there with me, and she leans over and whispers to me, "How long will it last?" Dolores, forever, forever. She just couldn't believe it, that an image like that of her would last forever. Of course, she's one of the co-founders of the United Farm Workers, and she's one of our profound heroes. Okay, Kennedy, another piece done from the lab. So we were asked to look at the transformation of the Ambassador Hotel. And you'll remember that Trump tried to buy that hotel. Right? He didn't get it, and it became a school. And this is the site where Kennedy was murdered. This is the moment. And this gentleman, Julio Romero, just passed. But he did get to see his rendition, that he's in the mural. Here he's the man who put the rosary in Bobby's hands as he was on the floor after he'd been shot. Paul Schrade has been one of our thought leaders in helping me design the new sections of the Great Wall. Paul Schrade bought Kennedy to meet Cesar Chavez and La Paz. And this is completely not painted with brush. On screen. All on screen. You can't tell the difference. And but it's amazing because I can make a mark like this big and it can be 5 feet. Right? So here we are. These hands are all real people that we photographed, and they represent different people who hold up the ideas of Bobby Kennedy. And you can see the scale here, how large it is. This is called Tiny Ripples of Hope. When we were producing this piece, you can see the stars in the sky. Dolores Huerta's hand is there. The director of MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense there. There's a number of poets and writers and people who we can call out. So in every case, what we're looking at is how we can teach. So when people take tours of these works, we talk about the content within it. And it's in fact an entire history lesson, right? So this piece with Kennedy is permanently placed in the Miguel Contreras Learning Center, exactly on the footprint where the ambassador was. And just a funny story. We were painting this, we were putting it up, and the news media came because there was a lot of controversy about there being a school this expensive and this beautiful on the edge of Pico Union. You know, they don't deserve this kind of, they're going to destroy the school, they're, you know, all of that. And one of the members from Fox Media basically said to me, is that gold leaf? I said, it is. It's gold leaf. The tiny little flakes of gold leaf that you have to burnish on, pain in the neck to put on. And I thought, why did I do this? I mean, a lot of things I could do, oh, this is going to be a great idea, and then it's really hard to do. We're going to put the burnishing on. He says, how much does that cost? It must cost a fortune. Oh, I said, this piece here, 39 cents. So really not that expensive, right? Just hard to work with, right? So this is, again, the history, all part of our archives of Kennedy taking the poverty tour. Here's with the Appalachian miners. Here he is in the native reserves. Oh, I guess I missed that last image. There's an image that is missing. It's called Seeing Through Others' Eyes. And it's about the 6 things that Kennedy told us were affecting the 1960s, which of course, similar, war, poverty, homelessness, all these things that are in our piece in the final version. So there's 2 murals. They're both 50 feet. We managed to achieve it in a relatively short period of time. My students complained bitterly that they were dying and exhausted, and I said, too bad, that's what art is, you have to finish it. So, it's not an easy thing. If you come into my class, people think they're going to take an easy class. Oh, that was terrible for them. They're like, this is really hard. Yeah, I know. Okay, here we are in Dallas, Texas. This gives you some of the underpinnings of the movement of geometric divisions. So a lot of what we do is about ratios and divisions. So here we're dividing it so that people can walk into the auditorium and they will see a piece called Danza de la Tierra. And Danza de la Tierra is about the dancing group, the Label Moon dancing team. And actually it's 2 of my students and they hate each other. They didn't want to dance together. Do I have to do this? I said, yeah, you have to do it, right? So there we are, and the skirt is all wonderful artists from Texas, the Ligrate space, and you can see this is hand painted. However, it's a hand painted piece. It's about 20 feet long and about 15 feet high, permanently installed on the site like this. You have to go there to see it, but it's also online, and it's Selena, and it's Rudolfo Anaya, and it's all wonderful artists that are in the skirt. Okay, so I'm going to end with this because I'm going to show you what I'm doing now. I'm in the process of completing the half-a-mile mural, extending it another half-a-mile. And you can watch us do this by coming to Bergamot Station. And between Tuesday through Saturday, we're open to the public, so you can come and heckle us. And you can watch us do this work. People love to watch I think you're used to going to museums, you're seeing a finished piece, right? But you don't ever see how that work evolves. I have an entire team of junior painters and senior painters. Those who are experienced muralists. Many of them students that I've trained over many years. And young people who are coming along. And of course, when I first went to the river, and I saw the concreted river, and I watched the river be concreted as a young girl. And I thought of it as, when the Army Corps of Engineers asked me if we could paint it, I thought of it as tattooing a scar, a concrete scar. So the Great Wall, metaphorically, is a tattoo on the scar where the river once ran. This is probably what our LA River looked like at one point. This is a woman I found in the archives when I was doing the research for USC, and she was called Anonymous Gabrielino Nation Woman. I think you'll see at the end here how her descendants came here to UCLA at the night of the opening of the UCLA piece. So this beautiful woman became part of our imagery. And this is, of course, what the Sonora town looked like. Notice that the stairs go 5 feet up, right? Because of the continual flooding and the rising of the river. So this was the answer of our city fathers. Probably not the best idea. Clearly not the best idea. All great cities were built on the banks of rivers. And we did not manage to do that. We managed to try to protect real estate and money, and therefore began this process, which was completed in the 70s, which is another time that the Army asked me to think about this site. So this is what it looked like when they were done. You know, it's like, you know, when God builds the world, and the 7th day he looks and he says, this is good. The Army gods, they said, this is not good, right? So a group of colonels came to me, which was really interesting. An African-American colonel, a Japanese colonel, and a Chicano colonel. They said, could you do something with this river? I thought, I could. If you will allow me to bring kids from everywhere in the city. So at all these points where we were working in these neighborhoods, we were separated. We were segregated. What about one site where we were integrated? That's what the Great Wall is. Kids from all the different neighborhoods. And ages from 14 through 21, although I have to admit, I eliminated the 14-year-olds after a while. Just too hard to work with 14-year-olds. So we began. We designed a park alongside of it. We watched the river concreted take all this pollution to the bay. And then, of course, we had the problems of the bay, the pollution of the bay. And we began to tattoo the scar. And we developed these images that would be a narrative, so it's a long, continuous story. And I'm not going to go into all the educational part of this, but to understand that this development of the Great Wall content is part of the entire process of making this work. Developing the Great Wall content is about ways of knowing. And how does that happen? It happens through academic research. It happens through popular cultural imagery. It happens through people's lived experiences being shared. It through the collection of metaphors, expert and not expert opinion, meaning biases and prejudices. Also, to get those into our hands so we understand them. This is us talking about reviewing the imagery through these various prisms. Prisms of age, of race, of gender and sexual preference, of class, of immigration status. And then having it reviewed by artists who come together. These are really amazingly auspicious artists who are taking a look at sections of the 1950s and criticizing it. And who's there is Magoo from Los Four, who's a very macho guy from the Chicano movement, Ed Burrell from the Audacious Gorillas from the Black Panthers, Judy Chicago from the avid feminist, Matt Worker, who is a Nobel Prize winner now, a Pulitzer Prize winner now, a cartoonist, and me being beat up by looking at the drawings and actually understanding how people read it. So in other words, not only what we read, but what you read. And today, the same process is going on with thought leaders. These are the Jewish team, just the Jewish team, rabbis and feminists, in a struggle about what should be included in the piece. And it ends up in being these content, with all the content that needs to be each segment, and then drawings that are being developed to see whether we're doing it. In the old days, all of this material was in magazines and books and films and music, and today all of it is online. It's on a program that we can use that is a timeline, that we use a program that is creates a method of us to be able to click on a part of the story and pull up the music or pull up the visual images and the photographic content. So it's developed much further in terms of how we're, it doesn't have to go into boxes anymore, it's all there and can then be used in the future for other works. Here's our kids. Most of these kids in these first segments are from the juvenile justice system. They've had to be arrested once, at least to be on the first teams, 80 of them in the first teams. And we have to work on the issues of how their body languages are different, how they perceive each other. Here we're learning African dance. We use 1 day a week in a classroom, and this is actually, I love this one, who I thought you were. The kids are acting out who they thought the other person was when they first came together, and their biases and their prejudices against each other, because they didn't work across race. But it's also play. It's also about the fact that this is a joyful activity. And it's very hard work in the sun at 118 degrees at times. In that river, terrible, terrible river experience in terms of the heat. And it's fair game. We made a rule that you could throw water on anybody. Right? Except they threw water on councilmen in suits when they came down the stairs. Please don't water my funders. We took trips into the Chinese catacombs underneath Alvera Street. They've closed those since, but we found them on the Recon Park's rolls. And we said, can I get in there? And then some person not knowing that they shouldn't do it, let me in. And I brought the kids in, and we were able to see what were built entirely by hand, by Chinese. And I think when Amy Ishii has passed since this time, but Amy wrote a book on camp notes. And she came and read to us what it was like to be in a concentration camp, before referred to as an internment camp. But our scholars are saying, no, concentration camps, please. So in concentration camps, Amy Ishii's book, talking to the kids about that experience. We also put we were painting a section on California Indians, and we put the carrying board for the baby backwards, and Bobby Bajara came out and said, we have to change that. And so here we are moving it, we turned it around, and now it's right, so that it's facing the right way. 2 young boys whose family owned part of Griffith Park in the land grants that we could find. These are the Harigi brothers in the juvenile justice system, both of them having been arrested and sued in juvenile hall. I got them released to work with me in this process. Here's the Chinese segment. This is what an encampment looked like in a daily thing. You can imagine, I have to feed everybody, I have to get everybody on site, I have to make them drink water, I have to make them not kill each other, and I have to make square footage for the day. Here we are teaching across. Some people can read rulers, some people can't, depending where you're being educated in our city, right? And here we are training each other. Here's the imaging of the content. The kids can speak about this imagery. They can give you a tour and they can talk about it. So, for example, here is the massive deportation of the 30s of 500,000 Mexicans deported, and how it ended up as a drawing for the image, how it ended up a grid for the wall. This section, every time I look at this, I remember that one of the kids missed a number. Oh my God. Then all the drawings are wrong. You can't connect it, because all you have to do is make a number be not in sequence, right? So literally getting them to do this work is quite a deal. Here's the Japanese section on the interment. Here's a section done in a subsequent summer, about 400 feet each summer, with a team of about 50. This is from a person from the internment camp, or the concentration camp, who was part of the Japanese 442nd most decorated infantry group in World War II, who said, "We are the fabric of America," which then inspired this image. He's now passed also. The image of them being the American flag. Rosie the Riveter, going into suburbia. She's going back in the 1950s into pink suburbia. I didn't make this up. White's moving. That was actually a company, White's Moving Bands. Right? I couldn't have made it up. Right? It was just too perfect. So here is it. Okay, Blacklist. People from Blacklist going into a trash can made up by HUAC, and all of these little pink commies, and of course McCarthy and the Red Scare. Very quickly, there's so much imagery, and this is the Chavez Ravine, the division of the Vaderas, and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is from that movie at the time, which is the spaceship coming down into Chavez Ravine. Paul Robeson, right? Here we are. So it's Gwendolyn Brooks who wins the Pulitzer Prize, and Martin Luther King is still in the back of the bus in the 1950s. So this is how far we got into the channel. There's a whole section on gay rights. This is the only section, only thing in this city on this issue. This is the origins of gay rights, and Harry Hayes' group, and the Daughters of Blightus. The people who were wearing the mask are from the Mattachine Society, a medieval society in which they had to wear the mask and to do dances that told the truth, but they were disguised. So as we move forward, this is The Howl and Allen Ginsberg, the beginning of the movie companies, a section on the swords being beat into plowshares, and Einstein, and this is Billy Mills, who wins in the 1960s the gold medal. Billy came to speak to us, and he told us the only reason he won is because every time he looked up into the stands, he saw Dakota Sioux. They weren't possibly there, right? But it made him run faster, and he broke his own time, and he won the gold medal. So this is what it looks like from the interior now of this long painted piece with about 750 feet missing. It will be double the size when we're done. This is a person like Billy Mills going into the boarding school movement as a Native American, separated from their families 4 years at a time, and people carrying the torch into the Olympics. So we're completing it now. We're building a bridge over it, which is now up. I have a picture to show you because I just got it. We just got it up. The bridge will divide up the space so that you'll be able to view the mural from the bridge. I've used metal iron pieces and designed the images of animals and marine life that have been disappeared because of the concreting of the river. This is our picture from yesterday. Look at the beautiful rails up now. It's not open to the public yet, but it will be shortly. So it will take 3 schools that have been separated from Coldwater Canyon, where they have to walk a mile around to get a bus. And now they will walk across the river and catch the buses. One of them is a continuing school, one of them is Grant High School, and the other is Valley Junior College. Here we are. It only took us 10 years to get this bridge. Interpretive stations, 5 of them down the wall. And here's where we are right now. And are in Bergamot painting the 60s and 70s. And it's quite an exciting series to see, including the beginning of the farm workers movement, the walkouts in East LA, the Watts riots. It's all there. And this is what we did for UCLA. This is the most permanent outdoor digital mural on glass. And this is not lit from behind. It's the way the light is reflected off the glass. And look at Toy Purina, discovered at USC. That image is anonymous. The night of the opening, I invited activists to come to the front and speak. And look who came forward. She's the spitting image of Toy Purina, a young Tonga woman, UCLA undergrad. Okay, I'll leave you with that.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Baca. Congratulations on the work. I wonder if you could talk some more about the impact that the art has on the community, the gang members, the teenagers, and others. What it means to them.
Well, it's kind of, it's very profound. I mean, it's like, I guess if you kind of live long enough, then you can begin to understand what impact it's had, right? And I've had the kind of gift of seeing people grow up and then have children the age they were when they worked on the piece. A number of my team members right now are alumni of the Great Wall. They're conducting tours, so if you took a tour at the Great Wall, you might get on a tour with an alumna. Some of them are teachers. Not making so many artists as making citizens, people who became engaged in working in their community.
So it affects and even changes their lives.
It did absolutely. They will tell you very clearly that it changed their lives. Here's one of the kids that wrote a song that was a rap song before rap. That is a kind of hilarious song. These two 16-year-old African-American girls. And one of them is now a spoken word leader out of Kentucky. And, you know, she wrote a song called There's a Mural. I know where the people all go in the sewer. And she said, don't get us wrong, it's just a funny song. But it isn't a funny song. They were 16, they got it. They got it, that their stories had been ignored, that there were things that needed to be elevated, and that's what they were doing. And I think, to the one, people will say, they really understood how to deal with each other across race.
But telling stories through art that nobody else is telling.
That's right. Pieces that are not. Still, we're the only place in LA where there is a memorial to the Zoot Suit riots. The only place where you would understand the massive deportations. And these have affected families generationally, right? So there are people who say, oh, my great-grandfather was taken away and we never saw him again, right? So that's the kind of thing that we see coming back to us. And then also, you know, there are some pretty amazing artists that have come out of that team as well. I didn't expect to train artists. I expected to just see if, honestly, I just wanted to see if I could make peace. If we could work together and not kill each other, and how would that work? And could we begin to talk about dropping the monikers of the gang marking and the names as gang members, and begin to think of ourselves as connected.
I have a question over here. Go ahead.
According to Google, according to Google, the lion and the lamb is attributed to Mussolini.
Mussolini.
And Trump retweeted it in 2016.
Is in what?
Donald Trump retweeted it in 2016.
Well, that's bad. That's bad. That's not what I mean, but that it did have an impact on me. I mean, I thought it was somebody said Ho Chi Minh, but I never looked it up. I saw it scrawled. And what was more important to me was the graffiti that made it. And the fact that graffiti was being used as a method within the neighborhoods to speak. It was like neighborhood newspapers. And I thought, what if speaking was a little bit more profound, if they could say more? And that's what I you know, thought. There was a lot of other stuff that was written that was pretty interesting too, like, you know, fuck Ed Gates.
I think we have one question.
Yeah, very fast questions. I've always admired the mural at the Spark Building, but I wonder whether, did you do that before your involvement with the Digital Lab at Spark, or?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part that you said.
The mural that you created at the Spark Building.
I don't have a mural at the Spark Building.
Yes, you do. You signed it on the outside. On Venice Boulevard.
On Venice Boulevard.
I'm sure. Okay, after this, I have the photo on my phone, I will show it to you.
There is a mural, but it's by Federico Vigil.
Okay.
And it's a wonderful New Mexican artist, and it's actually a trial of taking fresco, which was it's an ancient technique, goes back to the Renaissance, in which people work into wet cement. Actually, Diego Reyes' work was primarily in fresco. And what we were trying to do is advance fresco so that it could be changed with new materials, new cementitious materials, to see if it would last outdoors. And actually, on the front of our building, Federico's piece is now up almost 20 years, and it's not changed. So we haven't gone farther with that research. We really need a whole cadre of conservators and people and scientists helping us figure out how to do it. But I think there's something in that. Right now, the work that we're doing is on a substrate. That substrate is being painted indoors, which means we don't have to be in the dangerous river because of climate change. It's really, we can't predict when it's going to rain or when we're going to have winds and floods. So we're on this substrate that's unwoven, like the kind of stuff you put in your shirt to stiffen a collar. And that material is really lightweight. It's about the thickness of a layer of paint. And that can then be adhered to the river channel. Or it can begin to move around the world. We're getting requests for that, for the murals to go to the courtroom, for the 200th anniversary of the Constitution, for example. They've asked us to take it there. People want to see the mural in exhibition spaces. And we are working with a new printer that is an amazing wall printer. We put the digital image of the painted mural in the printer, and then the printer prints it on the wall. And it's remarkable. It's remarkable. It's just not totally light-proof. I have to find ways to stop the ultraviolet. I mean, I didn't also mean to be a chemist. It's part of the same way I didn't mean to do half of what I've had to learn to do, like run an institution or, and all of the time I had to figure out how to support myself being a university professor.
Thank you, Judy. Okay, we'll take one more question, but we're at close.
Just one quick question. You mentioned sometimes you paint physically the mural and other times you print the mural.
Yes.
What would be the determining reason for one or the other?
The location, like for example, in the Miguel Contreras Learning Center, it was in a cafeteria, and we would have had to disturb the cafeteria and all these massive numbers of kids, putting scaffolding and all that in that space. So it was better to print it on panels and then to install it. And we painted the work on screen in the lab, and we brought the high school students there. So in other words, our students were able to work more closely with them and out of the environment, out of the school environment. That really worked out very well for our students. Yeah. So in other words, we could do a piece on at a multiple story building, not have to pay for the expensive scissor lifts and other equipment to get us up. I'm just about to restore the piece on the freeway, which is the woman runner on the 3rd Street exit, which has been graffitied over and over and over again. And I've got some very anxious people, young guys who are destroying. Yes, look at that. This is a historic piece, yeah.
And I was the model for that.
You were?
You went to women's track on Venice
Yes.
and asked for someone who was a runner who also had some musculature. So
That's
Penny,
right, because the runners, the
are so skinny.
yeah, they're too skinny.
So, you remember Penny?
Yes.
Penny suggested me. And I worked at UCLA, but at the VA West LA Medical Center. And you came to the VA, because that's where I ran. On my lunch hour, I would run around the VA grounds. So,
Yeah.
I,
Thank
you
you
took
for
some photographs.
Thank you for your legs.
And so,
The
I
marathon
brought
runners,
this with you.
the marathon runners were so thin that they didn't look like women. And yeah, so
here's a better example.
thank you. That's
I
amazing.
came here to get your autograph.
Oh.
I don't hear your talk, but I brought this.
She's coming back.
Oh,
We're gonna bring her back.
great.
We're gonna bring
That's
her.
great.
We're gonna bring her back.
I'm not in my early 30s anymore.
Yeah, neither am I. Going up on that scaffolding and spending 9 months on the freeway is not something. That's something I could do anymore.
Well, I want to thank Judy for being with us today. We have an opportunity to get to Bergamot Station.
Yes, Bergamot.
Santa Monica, on what days are you open for the public?
Tuesday through Saturday,
Thursday to Saturday.
from 1 to 6.
Go down there and see her work, and see her team at work. Rushing to try to finish this by 2028 and the opening of the Olympics here, for it to be for lots and lots of people to see. So, thank you, Judy.
All right, everybody, don't be just yet.